that Snugcove House, after 27 years of trying, thanks to the good people scattered about the room, have finally obtained a large loan of 11.6 million from BC Housing. But all going well, we should, famous last word, start construction in the spring. Thanks to Judy Getty for the fabulous decorations. These are provided by God and Sue Fairburn. Lights provided by not God, but actually Ian. Where's Ian? Thanks for wearing a mask if you want. Okay.
This says now you're only 6'5".
Shall we begin?
I think that's good.
Why don't we? Okay.
Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, Clark, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, his sole mourner. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come from the story I'm going to relate. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name, however. There it yet stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, was Scrooge, the squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. External heat and cold had little influence on him. No warmth could warm, no cold could chill him. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming, they would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dog master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, upon a Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting, foggy weather, and the city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. The door at Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond a sort of tent, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but he picked up the cell phone and answered it right away. But the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle. In which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed.
A Merry Christmas, Uncle, God save you.
It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation Scrooge had of his approach.
Ah, humbug.
Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure.
I do. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item of them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you. By my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should.
Uncle.
Nephew, you keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep mine.
You keep it, but you don't keep it.
Well, leave me alone then. Much good may it do you, much good has it ever done you.
There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas amongst the rest, but I'm sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it's come around as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow travelers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good and will do me good, and I say, God bless it.
The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded.
Let me hear another sound from you, and you'll keep Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir. I wonder you don't go into Parliament.
Oh, don't be angry, Uncle. Come dine with us tomorrow.
Scrooge said he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression, said he would see them in that extremity first.
But why? Why?
Why did you get married?
Because I fell in love.
No, because you fell in love. Good afternoon.
Hey, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?
Good afternoon.
I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?
Good afternoon.
I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We've never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good afternoon.
And a Happy New
Good
Year.
afternoon.
His nephew left the room without an angry word notwithstanding. The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let two other people in. They were portly gentlewomen, pleasant to behold, and now stood in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him.
Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?
Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago, this very night.
We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries, hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir.
Well, there are no prisons,
No, plenty of prisons.
and the union workhouses, are they still in operation?
They are still, I wish I could say they were not.
Are the treadmill and the poor full vigor then?
Both very busy, sir.
Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
But under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the unoffending multitude, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for?
Nothing.
You wish to be anonymous.
I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what I wish, ladies, this is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have just mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there, and many would rather die.
Well, if they'd rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the ladies withdrew. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge, dismounting from his stool, tacitly admitted the fact to the expected clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat.
You want all day tomorrow, I presume.
If quite convenient, sir.
It is not convenient and it's not fair. If I were to stop half a crown, for it, you'd think yourself mightily ill-used, I think.
Yes, sir.
And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work.
Well, it's only once a year, sir.
It's a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning.
The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no great coat, went down a slide at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home as hard as he could pelt to play at blind man's buff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard. The building was old enough now and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door of his house, except that it was very large. Also that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also, that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London. And yet Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face, with a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but it looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up upon its ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key, turned it sturdily, walked in and lighted his candle. He did pause, however, and look cautiously behind the door, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtail sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door, and he said, "Pooh-pooh," and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went, not carrying a button for its being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, a little saucepan of gruel, Scrooge had a cold in his head, upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual, old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stand on 3 legs and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before a very low fire to take his gruel. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten, with a chamber in the highest story of the building. And it was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell began to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. And this was succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. And then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, and coming up the stairs, and then coming straight towards his door. It came on through the door. And a spectre passed into the room before his eyes. And upon his coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost." The same face, the very same, Marley in his pigtail, his usual waistcoat, tights and boots. And the chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons of his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now, though he looked the phantom through and through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and noticed the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, he was still incredulous.
How now? What do you want with me?
Much.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who are you then?
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Can you sit down?
I can.
Have you it then?
Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of it being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe in me.
I don't.
What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?
I don't know.
Why do you doubt your senses?
Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, lots of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are.
Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his horror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. How much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage around its head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast.
Mercy, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? Why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad amongst his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death.
The spectre raised a cry and shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands.
You are fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Would you know the weight and length of chain you bear yourself? It was full, as heavy, and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain. I cannot tell you all that I would. A very little more is permitted to me. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in life my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of a money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me.
7 years dead, traveling all the time. We travel fast.
On the wings of the wind.
You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years.
Oh, blind man, not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in his little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness, not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunities misused. Yet I was like this man. I once was like this man.
But you were always a good man of business, Jacob.
Business. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Hear me, my time is nearly gone.
I will, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be fly, Jacob.
I am here.
Pray.
I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer.
Oh, you were always a good friend to me. Thank you.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not.
Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow night when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us.
It walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the apparition reached it, it was wide open, and the spectre floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he blocked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. Scrooge tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotion he'd undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed without undressing and fell asleep on the instant.
When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber, until suddenly the church clock tolled a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. And light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn aside by a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction to that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright light, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of it using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cat, which it now held under its arm.
Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past. The things that you will see with me are shadows of the things that have been. They will have no consciousness of us.
What business has brought you here?
Your welfare. Rise and walk with me.
It would be in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, and the bed was warm, and the thermometer a long way below freezing, and that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon his at the time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped it rode in supplication.
I am a mortal and liable to fall.
Bear but a touch of my hand there, and you shall be upheld in more than this.
As these words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either side. The city had entirely vanished, and the darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day, with snow upon the ground and Scrooge clasped his hands together as he looked about him.
Good heaven, I was bred in this place. I was a boy here.
The spirit gazed upon him mildly.
Your lip is trembling. And what is that upon your cheek?
And Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice that it was nothing, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, its school, and a winding river. The ghost brought them to the school.
The school is not quite deserted. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still.
And Scrooge saw himself alone in the schoolroom, all the other boys gone home for the holidays. Scrooge looked at the ghost and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl came darting in and putting her arms around his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother.
Ebenezer, I've come to bring you home, dear brother. Home, home, home. Yes, home forever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be that home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you, and you are never to come back here.
The ghost gazed at the young girl.
Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered. But she had a large heart. She died a woman, and had, as I think, children.
One child.
True, your nephew.
Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly, yes. Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of the city, where it was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here too it was Christmas. Ghost stopped at a certain warehouse and asked Scrooge if he knew it.
Knew it, I was apprenticed here.
Then they went in. The sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried out in great excitement.
Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless its heart, it's Fezziwig, alive again!
And old Fezziwig laid down his pen, looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7, and he rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, and jovial voice.
Yo-ho there, Ebenezer, Dick.
And living a moving picture of Scrooge's former self, and a young man came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice.
Dick Wilkins, to be sure, my old fellow apprentice, bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick, dear, dear.
Yo-ho, my boys, no more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here.
Clear away. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off as if it was dismissed from public life forevermore, and the floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. And in came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. And in came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. And in came all the young men and women employed in the business. In they all came, one after the other, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they went, 20 couples at once, hands round half and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round, in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couple starting off again as soon as they got there. All top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. And when this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, Well done. And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter especially provided for that purpose. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, and there were more dances, and there was cake, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came when the roast and boil, when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood up to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig, top couple too. As for her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term, and a positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance. You couldn't have predicted at any given time where they would become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advance, retire, turn your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, back again to your place, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs. When the clock struck 11, this domestic brawl broke up, and Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. And when everybody had retired at the two premises, they did the same to them. And thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. The ghost turned to Scrooge.
A small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?
It isn't that. It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks and things so slight and insignificant that's impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune.
He felt the Spirit's glance and stopped.
What is the matter?
No, nothing particular.
Something, I think.
No, I should like to be able to say a word or two to my club just now, that's all.
His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to this wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air.
My time grows short. Quick.
This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again he saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a black dress, in whose eyes there were tears.
It matters little, to you very little. Another idol has displaced me. And if it can comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve.
What idol has displaced you?
A golden one. You fear the world too much. I've seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not?
What then? Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I have not changed towards you. Have I ever sought release from our engagement?
In words, no, never.
And what then?
In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end. If you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl, you who weigh everything by gain? Or, choosing her, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do. Will I release you? With a full heart for the love of him you once were.
Spirit, remove me from this place.
I told you, these were shadows of the things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me. I cannot bear it. Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer.
As he struggled with the Spirit, he was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by irresistible drowsiness, and further of being in his own bedroom. He had barely time to reel to bed, for he sank into a heavy sleep.
It's okay.
I received a text.
Sorry. Anything else there?
Nope.
Aside from this machine, if everybody could turn off any device that is not Victorian. If it's steam powered, it's okay. That is steam powered, isn't it?
Sorry. Sorry, everyone.
Live streaming people.
Apparently, they don't enjoy the big spotlight just over Martin's head. Hopefully that's better for you all. Sorry about that.
Oh, poor you, were at home, not
You
here.
want to be here next time. Yeah. Hi, Mom.
Can you make
Roll your hellos now.
Scrooge awoke in his bedroom. There was no doubt about that. But it and his own adjoining sitting room, into which he shuffled in his slippers, attracted by a great light, there had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove. The leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light as if many little mirrors there had been scattered, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that petrifaction of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many a winter season gone. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and great bowls of punch. In easy state upon this couch there sat a giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and who raised it high to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door.
Come in, come in. Know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me. You've never seen the like of me before.
Never?
Oh, I've never walked forth with my younger members of my family. Meaning, for I am very young. My elder brothers, born in these late years.
I don't think I have. No, I'm afraid I have not. Many brothers, Spirit?
More than 1,800.
A tremendous family to provide for. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion and learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have anything to teach me, Let me profit of it.
Touch my robe.
Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. The room and its contents all vanished instantly, and they stood in the city streets upon a snowy Christmas morning. Scrooge and the ghost passed on, invisible, straight to Scrooge's clerks, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Think of that. Bob had but 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his 4-roomed house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a thrice-turned gown, brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for 6pence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable park. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelled the goose and known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies while he blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. Mrs. Cratchit looked about anxiously.
What has ever gone your precious father then? And your brother Tiny Tim? And Martha weren't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour.
Here's Martha, mother. Hurrah! You're such a goose, Martha.
Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are.
Well, we did a deal of work to finish up last night. Had to clear away this morning, mother.
Well, never mind, so long as you are come. Sit you down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless you.
No, there's someone coming. Hide, Martha, hide.
So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. Bob looked around.
Why, where's our Martha?
Not coming.
Not coming? Not coming on Christmas Day?
Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, even if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash-house that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper.
And how did little Tim behave?
Oh, as good as gold and better. Sometimes he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much, and he thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to remember upon Christmas Day who made 9 beggars walk and blind men see.
Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. Tiny Tim's active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cuffs, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons and stirred it round and round and put it on the hob to simmer, Master Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a corner of the table. The 2 young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the 2 young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There was never such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there was ever such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet everyone had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were seeked in stage and onion to the eyebrows. But now the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witnesses, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody could have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Although a great deal of steam, the pudding was out of the copper. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding, Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, and that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, she would confess that she'd had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it though, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done, the cloth was clear, the hearth swept and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew around the hearth, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. Then Bob proposed a toast.
Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us.
God bless us, everyone, said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. Scrooge watched with an interest he'd never felt before.
Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die.
No, no, oh, no, kind spirit. Say he will be spared.
What then? If he be like to die, he'd better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. He then raised his head speedily on hearing his own name.
Mr. Scrooge, I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
The founder of the feast, indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
Oh dear, children, Christmas Day.
Oh, it should be Christmas Day, I am sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. Oh, you know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow.
My dear, Christmas Day.
I'll drink his health for your sake, and the day's not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I reckon.
The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartings in it. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care twopence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes. The Cratchits were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded and looked happier yet, in the bright sprinklings of the Spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. Without a word of warning from the ghost, this scene vanished, and Scrooge was greatly surprised to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room with the spirit standing smiling by his side and looking at that same nephew. Scrooge's nephew laughed, and a man more blessed in a laugh than Scrooge's nephew, I should like to know. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things that while there is infection and disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. When Scrooge's nephew laughed, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, laughed out lustily. Scrooge's nephew continued with his tale.
He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live. He believed it too.
More shame for him, Fred.
Scrooge's niece was very pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprised-looking capital face, a ripe little mouth that seemed made to be kissed, as no doubt it was, and the sunniest pair of eyes you ever saw in any little creature's head. Altogether, she was what you would have called provoking, but satisfactory too, perfectly satisfactory.
He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? Well, we don't lose much of a dinner.
Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner.
Well, I'm very glad to hear it, because I haven't any great faith in these young housekeepers. What do you say, Topper?
Topper clearly had his eye on one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, for he answered that a bachelor was a wretched outcast who had no right to express an opinion on the subject. Whereat Scrooge's niece's sister, the plump one with the lace tucker, not the one with the roses, blushed. After tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family and knew what they were about when they sung a glee or a catch, I can assure you. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while, they played at forfeits, for it's good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. There was first a game of blind man's buff, though, and I no more believe Topper was really blinded than I believe he had eyes in his boots, because the way in which he went after that plump sister in the lace tucker was an outrage on the credulity of human nature. Knocking down the firearms, tumbling over the chairs, bumping up against the piano, smothering himself among the curtains. Wherever she went, there went he. He always knew where the plump sister was. He wouldn't catch anybody else. If you'd fallen up against him, as some of them did and stood there, he would have made a feint of endeavoring to seize you, and they would instantly have sidled off in the direction of the plump sister. Then there was a game called Yes or No, when Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answering to their questions, yes or no, as the case was. The fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, rather a disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that prowled and grunted sometimes, and talked sometimes, and lived in London, and walked about the streets, and wasn't made a show of, and wasn't led by anybody, didn't live in a menagerie, was never killed in a market, and was not a horse or an ass or a cow or a bull or a tiger or a dog or a pig or a cat or a bear. At every new question put to him, this nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the sofa and stand. At last, the plump sister cried out,
I have found it out. I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is.
What is it?
It's your Uncle Scrooge.
which it certainly was. Admiration was the sentiment, though some objected that the reply to, is it a bear, ought to have been yes.
He has given us plenty of merriment, I'm sure, and it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. I say, Uncle Scrooge.
Well, Uncle Scrooge.
A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is. He wouldn't take it from me, but may he have it nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge.
Uncle Scrooge.
Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have drank to the unconscious company in an inaudible speech, but the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds and they were cheerful. On foreign lands and they were close at home. By struggling men and they were patient in their greater hope. By poverty and it was rich. In almshouse, hospital and jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it was only a night, and only now did Scrooge notice something strange at the bottom of the spirit's robe. From the foldings of its robe, the spirit revealed two wretched children at its feet.
Oh man, look here, look down here.
They were a boy and a girl, ragged, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at his feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. Scrooge started back, appalled.
Spirit, are they yours?
They are mankind's. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both. But most of all, beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased.
Have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it no more. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him.
The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, a ghost of the future. I fear you more than any spectre I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?
It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them.
Lead on, lead on. The night is waning fast, and it's precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit.
They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them. But there they were in the heart of it, on change amongst the merchants. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
No, I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead.
When did he die?
Last night, I believe.
Why? What was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
God knows.
What has he done with his money?
Well, I haven't heard. Company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me. That's all I know.
As well, it's likely to be a cheap funeral for upon my life. I don't know of anybody to go to it.
Well, I don't mind going. The lunch is provided. But I must be fed when I stay at home.
Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversation apparently so trivial, but feeling assured that it must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. It could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost's province was the future. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and he thought and hoped he saw his newborn resolutions carried out in this. They left this busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town, to a low shop where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. A gray-haired rascal of great age sat smoking his pipe. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into a laugh.
Wow, let the charwoman alone to be the first, let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's men alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance if we have an old free met here without meaning it.
Oh, you couldn't have met in a better place. You were made free of it long ago, you know, and the other two ain't strangers. What you got to sell? Huh? What you got to sell?
Half a minute's patience, Joe, and you shall see.
What odds then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber? Every person has a right to look after themselves. He always did. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose.
No, indeed, ma'am.
If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, wicked old screw. Why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying, gasping out his last there alone by himself.
It's the truest word that ever was spoke. It's a judgment on him.
I wish it was a little heavier judgment. Should have been. You may depend upon it if I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe. Let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor not afraid to them to see it.
Well, what do you call this? Bed curtains?
Ah, bed curtains.
Oh, you don't mean to say you took them down, rinse and all with him lying there?
Yes, I do. Now don't drop that oil on them blankets.
These blankets?
Well, whose else do you think? He isn't likely to take cold without them, I dare say. And you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache. You won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had. Fine one too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me.
What do you mean, wasted it?
Well, somebody was fool enough to dress him up in it to be buried in. I took it off him again, as if calico ain't good enough for such a purpose. It's quite as becoming to the body. He can't have looked uglier than he did in that one.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror.
Oh, Spirit, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what's this?
He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon this bed, and on it, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this plundered, unknown man.
Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with the death, or this dark chamber, Spirit, will be forever present to me.
The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in needlework, but surely they were very quiet.
And he took a child and set him in the midst of them.
Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face.
The colour hurts my eyes.
The color. Oh, poor tiny Kim.
They're better now again. It's been weak by candlelight. I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home from the world. Must be near his time.
Past it rather, but I think he has walked a little slower than he used these last few evenings, Mother.
I've known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Very fast indeed.
So have I, often.
But he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble. No trouble. And there's your father at the door.
She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob and his comforter came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid, each child, a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, Father. Don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said.
Sunday? Well, you went today then, Robert.
Yes, my dear, I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. My little child, my little child.
He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been farther apart, perhaps, than they were.
Spectre, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was with a covered face whom we saw lying dead.
The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they shadows of the things that may be only?
Still, the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood.
Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which if persevered in, they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me.
The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards the grave, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge.
Am I that man who lay upon the bed? No, spirit, no, spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been, but for this intercourse. Why show me this? If I am past all hope, assure me that I may yet change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life.
For the first time, the kind hand faltered.
I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past and the present and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach or tell me. I may sponge away the writing on the stone.
Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. Scrooge grasped the bed curtains and folded them into his arms.
Oh, they are not torn down. They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here. I am here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will.
Scrooge began to laugh and cry in the same breath.
I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world.
He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there perfectly winded.
There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas present sat. There's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right. It's all true. It all happened.
Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, no night, clear, bright, stirring, golden day. Scrooge looked down to see a boy in Sunday clothes and called out to him.
What's today?
Aye,
What's today, my fine fellow?
today? Oh, it's Christmas Day.
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. Hello, my fine fellow.
Hello?
Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one at the corner?
I should hope I did.
An intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? No, not the little prize turkey, the big one.
What, the one as big as me?
It is. We'll go and buy it.
Well, it's hanging there now. I will. Walker!
Sorry. No, no, I am in earnest. Oh, go and buy it and tell them to bring it here that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man. I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown.
The boy was off like a shot.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did, somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood by the door waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye.
I shall love it as long as I live. I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in his face. It's a wonderful knocker. Here's the turkey. Hello, whoop, how are you? Merry Christmas.
It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped them off short in a minute like sticks of sealing wax.
Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. You must have a cab.
The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again and chuckled till he cried. Scrooge dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said,
Merry
Christmas. Merry Christmas, morning.
Merry Christmas.
and Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, these were the blithest in his ears. He went to church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro and patted children on the head and questioned beggars and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it.
Is your master at home, my dear?
Yes, sir.
Where is he, my love?
He's in the dining room, sir, with his mistress.
He knows me. I'll go in there, my dear. Fred.
That's my soul. Who's that?
Wait, it's your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?
Let him in. It is a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. The clock struck 9, no Bob. 1/4 past, no Bob. Bob was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into the tank. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
Hello? What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time.
You are? Oh, yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please.
Well, it's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer, and therefore, I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him, and calling to the people in the court for help and a straight waistcoat.
A Merry Christmas, Bob. A Merry Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you in many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop. Bob, make up the fires and buy a second coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he became as good a friend. Oh, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but his own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived in that respect upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed,
God bless us, everyone. Hey.
thanks for watching.